Fanboys and fangirls everywhere love to share their thoughts on and discuss the stories and properties they love, and I am no exception. This is the series where I share various opinions, talk about interesting little tidbits I've noticed, pose questions, and analyse different aspects of the things I love. Welcome to the Fan Ramblings. Hello, and welcome back to the Fan Ramblings. So, as all Whovians will be aware, episode 6 of the new series has just aired this Saturday, which not only means we've reached the halfway point of series 10 already, but it's time for me to give some of my thoughts on the second batch of 3 episodes, Knock Knock, Oxygen, and Extremis. So, sit back and relax as I tell you how I feel about the progress this series has made in its second quarter. So, first up, with episode 4 of the new run, Knock Knock, which seems to have been the first episode to have gotten a pretty lackluster reception. Personally, I didn't mind it myself. It wasn't quite as balls to the wall scary as I'd hoped, but it was still creepy enough to keep me entertained. The scene with all the knocking sounds surrounding Bill and her friend just after Paul gets got was particularly effective, I thought. I've seen a few people make the assessment that your enjoyment of the episode is going to depend on how willing you are to tolerate horror movie tropes, and I'd say that's pretty much hitting the nail on the head. Though I'm not generally into them much myself, I come from a family of horror movie lovers, so I don't really have anything against any of the traditional tropes and what have you. For anyone who feels differently, I can totally see why this episode might not be your favourite. I think one of the things that struck me about this episode is the way it kind of serves as the completion of a gradual return to the darker tone and style of storytelling from Series 8 and 9. I mentioned previously how the pilot kind of brought back the more Matt Smith style magical/wondrous tone, because that works better for introducing a new companion. What struck me since I said that is how Smile kind of started off a transition back to the darker tone, opening with Bill's excitement to see the universe, before moving on to Skeletons in the Garden, and now Orphan Little Boy, and a dash of social commentary. Thin Ice continued this with what was probably the most dramatic of the 3 episodes, but it still lacked the development of plot that was more prevalent in the previous 2 series, nor was it particularly scary. Dramatic, definitely. Darker tone was definitely back by this stage, but scary? Not so much. Where Thin Ice completed the transition back to the darker tone, Knock Knock, on one level, completes the transition back to the style of story we had before, with a plot that's actually developed and aims to bring the scares. On another level, it didn't quite bring us all the way back to how Series 8 and 9 did things, largely because it focuses so much on its plot that there isn't much room left for character stuff. But as I said before, after 3 episodes in a row that were more character heavy, we needed a more plot heavy episode to balance the current series back out of it, and that's what I think Knock Knock aims to do. Of course, that's not to say that the episode's completely devoid of good character material. We do have the incarnation of awesome that is David Suchet, who holds the distinguished honour of being the first proper villain we've had this series. That's not to say the landlord's completely and purely evil. Like most great villains, he has quite understandable motivations for his abhorrent behaviour. What I mean is that he's the first one in Series 10 to pose what feels like an actual threat. He's menacing and deliciously creepy, and his best scenes come from playing off Peter Capaldi in some classic main hero confronting the villain scenes. The two of them make a great pair to watch, and it's even more fun knowing that Capaldi guest starred on Poirot a few years back. He guested on Suchet's show, and now Suchet is guesting on his show. There's just something really fun about knowing that makes them even more fun to watch together. The actual creatures of the episode, the lice, or dryads as the Doctor calls them, aren't much to write home about, but they serve their purpose pretty well. They're really just tools for the landlord to use. He's the main attraction here. Of course, here we have to talk about Bill. Not only is she the new companion, but also part of the instigation of this episode. It's when she and a bunch of other students rent the landlord's house that the plot starts to unfold. We get to see what she makes of the Doctor being a so-called Time Lord, a reaction that seemed pretty natural enough. She talks about how it sounds less like a species and more like a job or nobility, which is one way I can imagine a real-life person reacting. We also get a cheeky little mention of regeneration from the same scene. I can't imagine what that's set up for. I was especially glad to see that she shares Clara's old way of handling the travelling thing. Rather than disappearing for ages at a time, she pops out with the Doctor, then pops back to the moment she left, living her TARDIS life alongside normal life on Earth, rather than instead of it. I've always maintained that Clara's way of handling this was the most realistic of any companion. It's what I imagine most people would actually do. With the idea behind Bill being to write her as naturalistically as possible, it makes sense that they would lift the most realistic elements from previous companions' stories, such as this. Obviously there's the whole thing with the Vault that requires them to always come back to Earth, regardless of what she or the Doctor wants. But even without this, I can't imagine them doing it any differently. If this is what an actual person would do, then that's what Bill would do. Unfortunately for Pearl Mackie, many people feel that Bill is one of the weaker points of this episode. Criticisms that she has written out of character have popped up in multiple different reviews for this episode, and I can't honestly say that I don't see where people are coming from. While I'm still not super into the character as yet, I can still see the weird inconsistency this episode throws up. When the episode starts off, Bill's quite rightly and naturally suspicious as to why the great big creepy house is available to rent so cheaply. Then, post-title sequence, she's suddenly and completely changed her mind, and spends the rest of the episode adamant that there's absolutely nothing untoward going on in the house, desperately trying to convince the Doctor of this notion. Of course, she fails, and the Doctor goes and pokes his eyebrows into it anyway, and it's just as well that he does. It would seem that the writers shot themselves in the foot by dedicating the first 3 episodes to getting to know Bill as well as possible, because now that we know her, with this episode we have to ask the question, what happened to her being the one to have actually watched some movies? Surely she would know that you don't trust the creepy old man, you don't stay in the strangely cheap creepy old house overnight, and you don't just dismiss the strange noises that are creeping everyone out. I can just about accept that she would choose not to question Pavel's absence. She's been told he tends to lock himself away anyway, so she's probably just not saying anything in order to make a good impression with the others. Having said that, if he's disappeared after having trusted the creepy old man and stayed in the strangely cheap creepy old house overnight, and Bill can hear a bunch of strange noises that are creeping everyone out, you'd think she, of all people, would be the one to say, "Hey, this is just like a horror movie. Maybe staying here was a bad idea." And why is she so determined to get rid of the Doctor? Didn't the pilot establish that she would go to his lectures despite not actually being a student? That a lot of people would go to his lectures despite not actually being students? Literally, every other student in Knock Knock keeps going on about how cool the Doctor is, and how awesome it must be to have him as your grandfather. In fact, why does Bill even feel the need to claim that he is her grandfather? If he is so cool and the students love him so much, as they clearly do, why does she feel the need to justify his presence beyond it just being him being cool enough to lend his students a hand? Nobody really questioned why he was there before. They were just like, "Hey, it's a Doctor, cool, high five." I know she says she wants to make a good impression, but if everyone loves the Doctor, how would his presence and help with moving have a negative impact on that? It was a nice Easter egg hearing Capaldi get called grandfather by his companion though, and his indignance to not at least being called father and his claim he doesn't look old enough was a nice bit of continuity. Unfortunately for the episode, and new to writer Mike Bartlett, Bill's weird personality hiccup isn't the only questionable feature of the episode. I'd like to preface this next bit by clarifying that none of what follows is anything I noticed on the first watch. One of my main rules is that if I don't notice a flaw or plot hole on the first watch, it's probably not that major a problem. If I do notice it, then it probably is. It's not a flawless way of looking at things, but it usually serves me pretty well. So none of what I'm about to talk about really affected my enjoyment of the episode, but they are nonetheless pertinent questions that ought to be asked. The main thing concerns the twist that comes at the end of the episode, where it's revealed that the landlord isn't actually protecting his daughter, but his mother. I think this works a bit better than Eliza being his daughter, because that would make it another standard issue parent will do anything to protect their kid story. With Eliza being his mother, there's an interesting bit of role reversal, with the child being the protector and the parent being the protectee. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head where that's been the case. So as far as I'm concerned, that's quite an original idea. It also allows the Doctor an opening with which to turn the tables, encouraging Eliza, as the parent, to take charge of the situation. So it served the resolution of the plot pretty organically too. This element also lends some interesting development to the landlord himself. He's been stuck in a kind of childlike state his whole life, living the childish but understandable dream of being able to prevent someone he loves from dying. He hasn't grown up. He doesn't fully understand how wrong his actions are. He claims that the rules of everyone paying their dues apply to everyone except himself, which is quite a childish mentality to have. Of course, he is made to pay his dues at the end of the episode. So now that we've established that this was a good plot point, let's ask the question, why did it have to be a massive twist? As I've seen others point out, the twist doesn't really change anything about the situation they're in. The best twists always rock your perception of the events leading up to this moment, like the famous twist from The Sixth Sense, for example. A good twist always serves the story and ups the entertainment value, but if anything, this twist potentially harms the story, because it makes Eliza's actions at the end of the episode look a bit like a Deus Ex Machina, rather than logical, well-integrated resolution built out of elements that were already there, like the end of Flesh and Stone, for example. It also means that all that brilliant development of the landlord gets squeezed into the final scenes of the episode, which doesn't allow for a huge amount of exploration of the character. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely appreciate the fact that they tried to give us a twist, but I think it probably would have made the episode better if they'd just been open from the start about Eliza being the landlord's mother, once the shit started hitting the fan. Other than that, the only questions that remain are slightly nitpicky ones, such as how did the students eaten by the lice come back after presumably being torn apart by them? The others make sense, they were preserved in the walls. They were physically intact. They just needed their life forces returned to them. How did Eliza put the others back together again? Also, weren't the prior disappearances investigated by anybody? Or did the landlord only choose people who had nobody to miss them? If the latter, why did that change this time? Or does he go around killing everyone they told about their new place? Weren't those disappearances investigated and found to be linked? Or did he just kill every possible person that could have possibly reported a disappearance before they could do so? That's an awful lot of people to kill. If the former, how were the previous victims' things not discovered before? The Doctor found them pretty damn easily. Or were they hidden originally and brought out of hiding just before the events of this episode for some reason only the landlord knows? Maybe he was in the process of dumping or destroying all the old evidence? But then, if that's the case, why didn't he do that sooner? And when the second bunch of people disappeared, did the police not find in their records the 20-year-old reports of the first disappearances associated with that address? Is the landlord under suspicion by the police, but they're unable to prove anything? So many questions. Also, final nitpick, why does the Doctor tell Harry that being scared doesn't help? What happened to fear as a superpower? Anyway, my final verdict on Knock Knock would be that it's good and creepy, but the plot itself is definitely flawed. It's not bad, but it's not great either. It's one of those episodes that lies somewhere in the okay to good region. A statement that cannot be applied to Oxygen, because Oxygen is brilliant. Ever since I heard the concept behind this episode, I was really looking forward to it, and though it's probably not quite as good as Matheson's Series 8 episodes, it still didn't disappoint. Interestingly, I think it's one of those episodes you need to watch twice to fully appreciate, especially if you're like me and you don't tend to be in critique mode on the first watch. For me, I use the first watch as a chance to just sit back and enjoy the episode, like I used to when I was a kid. But anyway, the concept of Oxygen is great because of how dark and deceptively relatable it is. The idea of people being expendable in the eyes of a company, the priority of which is to make money, can be seen in real life, such as when people get made redundant or let go from their jobs to save costs. Of course, the episode takes this idea to an extreme to create what Matheson himself described as a pitch-black satire, by having the company actually kill the employees it deems inefficient. This commentary on the ruthless nature of capitalism is extended by taking a basic human requirement, the air you breathe, and slapping a price tag on it. This element evokes the idea that if a corporate giant can get away with something, they won't hesitate to do it. If they can charge you for every breath you take, they will. Their ruthless nature is further highlighted by the manner of their defeat. The Doctor defeats the company by putting their wallets in his crosshairs, forcing them to spare him and the others because it costs less that way. The company only decides not to kill them, not out of the goodness of their hearts, not because they've been made to see reason, see the error of their ways, but because of the money, their money. Matheson wasn't kidding around when he describes this satire as pitch black, and I love how shamelessly obvious he is with the script. Not only does the episode not pull any punches, it doesn't even try to hide what's really getting at. No secret is made of the fact that Oxygen's a commentary on capitalism, or, more accurately, how ruthless capitalism can become. I can't help but kind of admire that. I've seen examples in the past of companies acting underhandedly in places that I've worked. Obviously, these things weren't quite as extreme as we see in this episode, but the same principles apply. So it's nice to see someone straight up call companies out on their behaviour sometimes. Oxygen also contains a great and very clever visual and practical metaphor, with the spacesuits being the on-the-ground threat. As the Doctor himself points out in the episode, the characters are literally fighting the suits, the metaphorical suits that run the company, and the literal spacesuits that are coming after them. Nicely done, Matheson. Nicely done. And it's a properly scary one too. The corpses in the suits look dead creepy. Get it? Dead creepy? Eh? Eh? Never mind. And the ever-looming threat of running out of air makes for a very tangible obstacle. Not many people can relate to having to fight or run away from monsters in order to survive, but we can all relate to needing to breathe. And after the Doctor explains at the beginning of the story what happens to your body in a vacuum, you really do begin to appreciate what our heroes are up against. Add to all this the fact that the faster they breathe, the faster they use up the limited oxygen, so they have to try and remain calm and breathe normally all the while they're being chased by killer spacesuits, and you raise the stakes even more by adding this extra obstacle. For once, fear isn't a superpower, though unlike Knock Knock, this episode actually gives you a reason why. Fear is a superpower, but only up until you find yourself in a situation where your oxygen's limited. The pre-title sequence is really effective too. The idea of the monsters being able to sneak up on you and your partner and kill your partner in utter silence while you remain blissfully unaware because your back is turned is a very unnerving prospect. While this is another episode like Knock Knock that focuses more on its plot and the threat of the week, it does still do some very important and notable things with the characters that make this one probably the most evenly balanced episode of Series 10 so far. There's not much that goes on with Bill here, apart from the fact that this is the first time she gets to see the Doctor in a more vulnerable state, having gone blind after exposing himself to the vacuumless space to save her. We see her more serious side again here, as she asks the Doctor to stop making jokes and just be straight with her, which is nice to see. I much prefer her in scenes like these, though the whole racism exchange between her and Dahren was pretty good too. I can't think of many other examples of a non-white character being branded a racist. The other thing I noticed with Bill is that she once again has the instinct to run rather than deal with the problem, like she previously did in Smile. This is of course instigated by Nardole, and even if it weren't, would still arguably be quite realistic. But I do wonder if it does give the impression of her being somehow less heroic than previous companions, who never questioned the idea of helping out. Donna wanted to help more than the Doctor did in Fires of Pompeii. I can't recall Amy ever questioning why the TARDIS team should help out, or resorting to running as her first instinct, and Clara had a go at the Doctor in Rings of Akaten when she thought he was just walking away. Didn't Bill already learn this lesson back in Smile? Didn't she admire the Doctor back then for being the helpline? This is the second time she's reacted this way, and the second time that it's been played seriously, as opposed to Nardole, where it's played for laughs, so you're not really supposed to take it seriously when he does it. And I'm concerned that if they keep doing this with her, it'll make her look cowardly at best, or selfish at worst. It's important to note that when Bill reacts this way, it's never out of cowardice or actual selfishness per se, just a natural sense of self-preservation and a momentary lack of consideration for the wider consequences to others, due to fear for our own safety, which is only natural. But if Whovians have proven anything, is that some of us aren't always very good at looking at things like this logically and actually analysing them for what they are. Too many of us have been known to just take a thing at face value and judge it according to the way it looks, as opposed to what it actually is. Bottom line, they should probably be careful about overdoing this with Bill. Also, I like the bit where Bill jumps to test the artificial gravity. It's a small detail, but it's what a real person would do, which has kind of been the whole memo with Bill in terms of her reactions to things. So that was a nice touch. However, Bill's not the best thing to come out of this episode, character-wise. That honour goes to the increased presence of Nardole, and the greater amount of light shone on his relationship with the Doctor. There have been little flashes of it in the previous episodes, such as the way he gets to tell the Doctor off at the end of Thin Ice, and his happiness at the end of Knock Knock that the Doctor didn't have to leave Earth to find an adventure to quench his thirst with. But here is where we really get more of a proper insight into it. Their relationship really kind of reminds me of two flatmates who've lived together for so long that they're starting to get sick of one another's bad habits. There's a lot of bickering and needle between them. Nothing malicious, but it is very much the relationship between an unstoppable force and an immovable object. The Doctor just wants to go back to his old life of ultimate freedom and endless travelling, but Nardole won't let him because he's made an oath that he must uphold. It was good to see this delved into a bit more, not least because it offered Matt Lucas his biggest chance so far to shine. He's finally really allowed to get into the serious side of the character, particularly in the final scene, where he really lets rip on the Doctor for his reckless behaviour and total disregard for the situation with the Vault. This episode really did him and the character a world of good in terms of development. We also get some fun hints about his past. Obviously there's the running gag with Velma, the AI, but more interestingly, he mentions that he hasn't seen his true face in years because he swapped it for this one on the run. An indication as to his shady past that Stephen Moffat teased us about? We've also got to wonder about that moment when he talks about how we would commit a robbery. Another thing that's been glimpsed, but not fully explored until this episode, is the way that the Doctor's going a bit stir-crazy. Again, it was good to see this fleshed out, and the way it leads into the conflict between him and Nardole, and the deeper look in their relationship, provides one of the episode's indisputable highlights. One of the other highlights comes in the form of the Doctor suffering as a result of his actions, both heroic and reckless. While it's not entirely fair to call it reckless of him to go to the Chasm Forge, seeing as he was answering a distress call, he did abandon his pre-existing duties in order to do so, putting the Earth and potentially the universe at risk of an even greater danger. In a roundabout way, he's forced to pay for this by having to be a hero for Bill and swap her faulty helmet for his when they have to go outside the space station, leaving himself exposed to the vacuumless space. The fluid in his eyes boils, just as he described at the beginning of the episode, and he goes blind as a result. While saving Bill and responding to the Chasm Forge distress call were heroic acts, he only had to do the former because he did the latter, and being in possession of a time machine, he could have done that at any time. He put off dealing with the foretold on the Space-Oriented Express for literally hundreds of years. He could have done the same here, but his hunger for adventure got the better of him, and he was made to pay the price. Of course, as Jamie Matheson himself has said, this also served to not cheapen the level of threat of the episode, by establishing the dangers of venturing into a vacuum unprotected, only for the Doctor to get through doing just that unscathed. This was also partly the reason they had his blindness continue over into episode 6. Doctor Who as a show often gets criticised for its perceived lack of consequences, which is why there's a disturbingly high demand for more character deaths, particularly those of companions for some reason. Having the Doctor not only get blinded as a result of his dangerous actions, but having that continue over several episodes is a great way to combat that criticism, as well as making the next couple episodes that bit more exciting, because it's now that bit harder for the Doctor to save the day. Of course, like all episodes, Oxygen isn't perfect. Most of the criticism I personally have of it, however, are all largely nitpicks. For instance, the opening scene of the pilot established that the Doctor quite often gives off-topic lectures. So, why does one of his students question it when he does it again in this episode, talking about space when he's supposed to be lecturing them on crop rotation? On the subject of crop rotation, and the Doctor going off-topic, what does he even teach at this university? The essays of Bill's that he's marked in the pilot are labelled astrophysics, but apparently he also gives lectures on crop rotation, or is supposed to. Are these two things related? Maybe I'm being thick, but I can't fathom for the life of me what possible connection there could be between these two things. In fact, if the Doctor teaches astrophysics, wouldn't his lecture on Oxygen not be comparatively on topic? Then there's the bit where Bill's about to get got by the suits, and she cries, "Mum, answer me." I gotta admit, this seemed a bit forced and random to me. At what point in this scene did she start talking to a dead mum? And would a real person really cry out for them to answer? Just felt a bit irksome to me personally. Also, if Bill wasn't actually dead, why was she zombified? The Doctor says she didn't get a lethal dose. Dose of what? When the guest characters get killed by the suits, they appear to be getting electrocuted. I'm guessing that means a dose of electricity? I guess that would mean she was just knocked out. But then, how did the Doctor get her back? He appears to just press a button, he hears something release, and then Bill wakes up. Maybe it's just me, but it didn't really seem clear as to what he actually did just there. If she was simply knocked out, couldn't he have just given her a slap in the face to wake her up? I don't know. I did tell you these were just nitpicks. Oxygen's definitely the best episode of Series 10 so far. Jamie Matheson's quickly become one of my all-time favourite Doctor Who writers, and I think he could be the next Stephen Moffat. You see, before Moffat became showrunner, he was the only writer of the Russell T Davies era to get brought back for all 4 series, and every story he wrote for those series was super well received, and most of them are firm fan favourites, still to this day. Moffat was the star writer of the Davies era, which made him the obvious choice to take over as showrunner, but ever since he did, there hasn't really been a star writer to replace him. Certainly, there wasn't one during the Matt Smith era, which is what made it harder to discern who would make the best successor to Moffat. The only writer to have been consistently brought back every series is Mark Gatiss, whose episodes can vary in quality, and it probably is worth considering that he is a personal friend of Moffat's. No offence to the guy, but I don't think he's what most fans would have in mind for a star writer. However, ever since Peter Capaldi became the Doctor, both Jamie Matheson and Peter Harness have been brought back to write for every one of his series. While Harness got off to a divisive start with Kill the Moon, Matheson hit the ground running with Mummy on the Orient Express and Flatline. A new to Who writer who impressed the higher-ups so much that they had him write 2 episodes in his debut series, and he managed to make both of them winners. He may have faltered a bit with The Girl Who Died, which he co-wrote with Moffat, but all of his solo work, Oxygen most definitely included, has been bloody brilliant. If Chris Chibnall continues to bring him back for every series, I think he could well prove to be the natural choice to take over from him, just as Moffat was with Davies. Whatever the future holds for Matheson, I do hope we get to see a whole load more Doctor Who episodes coming from him, especially if they continue to be as good as this. And with all that, we finally come to the most recent offering of Series 10, Episode 6, Extremis. I have to admit, when this episode finished, I wasn't initially sure how I felt about it. It certainly has its share of good points. Continuing on from the previous episode, we have two things: the Doctor's blindness and the continued development of Nardole. The episode's usage of the Doctor's blindness is reasonably effective, seeing as the plot's based around the reading of a text that drives anyone who reads it to suicide. The fact that the lead hero, the one who has the best chance of surviving it, can't read it when he needs to, naturally adds an extra obstacle to the story, as well as providing a few laughs. This is what I meant earlier about consequences. The Doctor's prior rash decisions have now impacted his ability to act upon another threat. To be perfectly honest, I can't imagine Extremis working anywhere near as well as it does without the Doctor being blind. If it weren't for that element, you wouldn't have scenes like when the so-called monks come for the Veritas. You'd also have to find some other obstacle to delay the Doctor from reading the Veritas until the climax of the episode, whereas him still being blind from the previous episode makes for a nice pre-established obstacle that integrates itself into the overall narrative pretty naturally. So it seems just as well that Matheson came up with the idea in the first place. Even when the Doctor utilises a temporary get-out from his new affliction, Moffat's careful to maintain the sense of consequence. Yes, the Doctor can help himself see again, but only for a limited time, and at the cost of screwing over his future self in some way. Of course, this was just a simulant Doctor, but he believed that he and the world he was occupying were real at the time, so it's pretty safe to say that if the real Doctor were to do the same thing, the same rules would apply. Either way, the important thing here is that Moffat did make this point, so part of the whole purpose behind making the Doctor blind in the first place isn't undermined. He can only get out of paying the price temporarily, and even then, doing so will require him to pay a further price down the line. Once again, Nardole proves to be one of my favourite things about the episode. I'm glad that Oxygen hasn't proven to just be a one-off, and that they're starting to make more use of him in the series now by actually having him join the Doctor and Bill on their adventures. Here we get to see a bit more of his clever side. In the Doctor's absence, he's the one to deduce the true nature of what's going on, making good on the promise and teases that he's not quite the bumbling oaf he likes people to think he is. It's quite a Doctorish trait of his, when you really think about it. What's becoming increasingly clear about Nardole is that he's very good at standing up to his fellow heroes. He just falters a bit when it comes to facing down the actual bad guys and other threats. You can see this in the badass exchange between him and Bill, where we get to see him put her in her place, yes, immediately before yelping at the sight of a dead body. I actually found it really satisfying to see him tell Bill off. As much as I respect her for not wanting to be treated like a damsel in distress, or like she can't take care of herself, I felt like she was being kinda nasty to Nardole in the way she said it. Particularly the line, "Don't you dare do that." So, getting to see Nardole bite back felt really good. It's the moments like this that really make me hope he'll evolve and grow as Series 10 progresses. I really want to see him finally face down a main villain the way he has both the Doctor and Bill, and truly become the real hero he's shown he has the potential to be. I don't think there's anything that could possibly be more fitting for him, especially given the tagline of this series. And of course, coming to the good points of Extremis that didn't originate from Oxygen, we have the flashback scenes of the episode, which reveal not only the origins of the Doctor's vault, what's inside it and the nature of the oath he's made, but also how he and Nardole came to be travelling together. I just assumed that after River left Beryllium to meet her fate at the library, the Doctor had just taken Nardole along with him, and I imagine others did as well. Here it's revealed that post-Beryllium, the Doctor actually went travelling alone for a while, and that River sent Nardole after him to look after him. Makes sense. I think this probably is what River would do. The Doctor made sure she was safe by giving her a sonic screwdriver, and River made sure he was safe by giving him Nardole. Good old Nardole. Of course, if the events of these flashbacks form the Doctor and Nardol's first adventure, just the two of them, surely that would mean these scenes are set pre the return of Dr. Mysterio. No mention of the vault there. Was Nardole initially okay with leaving it behind, like Bill is today? Did something happen to make him see the error of his ways? Is that partly why he gets so annoyed with the Doctor for continuing to abandon it? Interesting. So that's Dr. and Nardole this episode. I can't really find all that much to say about Bill, other than it was nice to see a glimpse into her everyday life with the date scene, which definitely provides one of the bigger laughs of the episode. Beyond that, not a whole lot really happens with her here, which is fine. If you think back to Series 4 and how Donna was handled, they didn't really make all that much of a move on her story until the final 3 episodes. There's plenty of stuff that happens to her throughout that series, and no shortage of moments that focus on her and her emotions, but those things aren't necessarily telling or evolving her story. That doesn't start to happen in earnest until Turn Left, really, when you think about it. So there is still time for them to pull something out the bag for Bill before the end of this series. The only problem is, I'm still not getting much of a sense of her having her own story, a character arc to progress with. As I've said before, every companion of the Revival era has had a story of their own to tell, something with a natural endgame that provides a logical climax and exit to their time in the TARDIS. I'm still not really seeing anything like this with Bill yet. Like I said, there's still time for them to do something about this. I just feel like this is something we should all be keeping an eye on as the show goes on. The plot of Extremis is certainly much more developed than the pilot, which is a very welcome thing to see, especially from Mr. Moffat. It's still not overly complex, but it doesn't have to be in order to be good, and the central concept is actually a very clever and inspired idea. The idea of a book that contains a secret so terrible that it drives all those who read it to commit suicide is one that I can't honestly say I've seen anywhere else. And the reveal of what that secret is doesn't disappoint either. When building up a secret in such a big way as this episode does, it can be all too easy for the eventual reveal to end up being something of an anticlimax. While it didn't personally make my jaw hit the floor with shock, the answer to the mystery is clever and actually quite logical. The Doctor himself asks the question: particle physicists and priests, what could scare them both? And I think the answer being that all of reality, everything anyone on Earth has ever or will ever know, is just an elaborate illusion, is a pretty good and satisfactory answer. That idea is probably the only thing that could break both priests and scientists, because it would shatter both their belief systems completely and render everything they've dedicated their lives to utterly meaningless. As an idea, it also taps into a very real conspiracy theory. I'm not sure if that's really the term, it probably isn't, but it's the best I got. People in real life have posed this question before. In response, Extremis turns round and asks, what if that were true? It was a very clever twist to have everything after the pre-title sequence take place in holographic simulation of the real world. It plays around with the audience's perception of events. You get so wrapped up in the Doctor meeting the Pope that you kind of forget about the email he received at the end of the pre-title sequence, and you almost don't question it when the Pope says Extremis, which of course also happened to be the subject header of the aforementioned email. Nor do you think to question the pixelating transition that takes us out of the titles and back into the episode itself. It only becomes apparent once the twist has been unveiled and explains what this particular visual effect was meant to denote. It signals the jump in the episode's focus from what's happening in the real world to what has happened in the simulation. When the same transition is used again at the end of the episode to herald the jump back into the real world, it all becomes clear and self-explanatory. We've been watching the simulant Doctor's memory prints of the events, just as the real Doctor has been. There is, however, something of a massive downside to the revelation that Extremis mostly takes place in a fake world. Namely, it results in the main plot of the episodes ending up as little more than filler. It's very good filler, and very cleverly written filler, but filler nonetheless. As far as the events of the real world are concerned, the only thing that's changed by the end of the episode is the fact that the Doctor now knows that the monks are coming, which could have been squeezed into the end of any prior episode, really. Nobody's been killing themselves because of a terrible secret in a forbidden book. Neither Bill nor Nardole are really dead. The Doctor hasn't even actually met the monks yet. I think the episode would have been better spent dedicating itself solely to the Vault origin flashback, and fleshing that out. At the moment, I kinda get the impression we could otherwise skip this episode entirely, and just go straight to Pyramid at the End of the World, without having missed any key information. Of course, we'll have to wait until the episode airs to see if that is true, but that's certainly the way it seems at the moment. Speaking again of the Vault origin flashbacks, the reveal that it is indeed Missy that's locked inside the Vault felt pretty lackluster. After everything I said last time about thin ice only providing a strong implication, not a strict confirmation that whatever was in there was alive, a person, Knock Knock, came along and pretty much straight up told us that yes, this was indeed the case, what with the Vault's then mysterious occupants being heard playing the piano. I think this was the point at which they really began to give it away, and I think this shows in Extremis in the way they pretty much immediately tell you, before the opening titles have even rolled, that it's Missy who's in there. The way the Doctor talks to the prisoner in that final scene makes it clear that it's someone he has a fondness of some kind for. Given that they've already been established to be dangerous as well, it was pretty effectively narrowed down to either John Sims' master or Missy. Then there was the foreknowledge we were given, not only of the fact that Missy would be turning up in Extremis, but the fact that this would be the episode where the mystery was revealed too. It didn't really take much for people to put two and two together, especially given certain shots from the series trailers of Missy standing in what appears to be a glass case of some kind. The inside of the Vault, perhaps? It may not be, necessarily, but it's a pretty likely guess. All in all, when the answer finally does come, it comes with something of a whimper rather than a bang. This is the second time Missy's been the subject of an easily guessed mystery. I mean, who didn't immediately guess, straight after meeting her in Deep Breath, that she was a female incarnation of the Master? It's a bit of a shame that history's kind of repeated itself a bit here, but at least this time you weren't able to guess the answer straight after the first episode. It took until the fourth for that to happen, so at least there's that. The curious thing about Missy being the occupant of the Vault is what Extremis reveals about the specific circumstances of her incarceration. The way the Vault's been talked about so far in Series 10, it's been made to sound as though all hell would immediately break loose should the one locked inside it ever get out. Yet, the flashbacks reveal that Missy wasn't really posing any immediate threat upon being locked up. I mean, presumably she was in the middle of doing something typically nefarious when she was captured, and of course, if/when she gets out, it won't be long before she goes back to doing typically nefarious things again. But I don't get the impression that something cataclysmic would happen the very second she stepped out. The Doctor isn't generally too fussed about letting the Master roam free, so long as they're not posing an immediate threat. Just look at all the times the Master's escaped after being defeated. The Doctor's never tried to pursue them or lock them up for their actions before. His attitude's always been, Master's no longer an immediate threat, job done. And just let his fellow Gallifreyan roam free to concoct a new evil plot. Missy wasn't locked up for posing a threat. She's locked up, essentially for her own protection. She's only in there because the Doctor tricked the Executioner guys. Given that that's the context behind her imprisonment, why is it such a dire thing if she gets out? Is there something that the Doctor and Nardole know that is yet to be revealed to us? Why is it so important that the Doctor keeps his oath if he only made it as a trick for the Executioner guys? There seems to be an awful lot of new questions being thrown up by the answers we've been given, and I can only say I hope that they're all dealt with before the end of the series. It'd be a real shame for Moffat's last series to end up having a resolution that's disappointing for having left some weird details unexplained, and only half your questions answered. He knows he's received accusations of this in the past, so hopefully he'll have felt compelled to act upon those comments for his last turn at the wheel. Overall, I found Extremis to be pretty alright. It's an episode that has some really good points, but being mostly set up for what's really going to be a two-part story, and consisting mostly of elaborate filler material, lets it down a bit. It's a shame that, with this being his final series in charge, neither of Moffat's episodes so far in Series 10 have really amounted to all that much in the grand scheme. Hopefully that will change later, for both his and Capaldi's sake. I'll admit, I've never been too fussed about the sound of the so-called Monk trilogy, and part 1 of it hasn't done a huge amount to change that, but I'll still try and reserve judgment on the whole thing until Pyramid at the End of the World and Lie of the Land have aired. Maybe those two will turn it around. All in all, I think the second quarter Series 10 has improved on the weaknesses of the first, but still falls down in places. I'd say it's probably been about as good as the first, which is in keeping with the reactions from other fans that I've seen so far. Series 10's definitely been one of the most consistent series of the show in years, but unfortunately, it's been consistently middling. However, Oxygen in particular is hope that the rest of the season will improve, and build some real stakes for Capaldi and Moffat's final episode at Christmas. With the as yet unresolved plot lines of Missy's really clever idea with the Daleks, and the Harmony Shoal Brains infiltrating American Unit, not to mention a two-master team-up and Mondasian Cybermen still to look forward to, who knows what may be coming our way. Thanks for watching. Be sure to leave your thoughts on Series 10 so far in the comments below in as courteous and polite a manner as possible. That's all for now, folks. Until the next time.